What if I told you a billionaire's most desperate decision saved 3 lives, including his own? Have you ever watched someone you love suffer, knowing all your money, all your power, meant absolutely nothing? That crushing moment when you realize success is just an expensive lie you tell yourself while the people who matter most slip away? At 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, Corbin Thorne stood outside his son's bedroom door. Behind that mahogany barrier, 11-year-old Avery hadn't spoken a word in 3 days. Not to his father, not to his tutors, not to anyone. Corbin owned 17 companies. His net worth exceeded most countries' GDP. He could buy islands, fund space missions, make politicians return his calls within minutes. Yet he couldn't make his own child smile. 3 months earlier, the headline screamed a different story. Billionaire CEO Corbin Thorne announces adoption plans. The business world buzzed with speculation. Stock prices fluctuated. Reporters camped outside his Hamptons estate, hungry for the angle that would explain why America's most successful bachelor suddenly wanted to become a father to a stranger's child. They got it wrong. Every single one of them. This isn't a story about money. This isn't about publicity stunts or charitable tax write-offs. This is about a man who discovered that sometimes the only way to save your family is to make it bigger. If you've ever felt powerless despite having everything, hit that like button, because this story will change how you see family forever. But let me take you back to where it really began. Not in boardrooms or press conferences, but in a grief so deep it swallowed whole lives. Avery's mother died on a random Thursday. No warning. No goodbye. A brain aneurysm claimed her while she was reading bedtime stories, her voice trailing off mid-sentence as the book slipped from her hands. One moment she was there, warm and laughing and making funny voices for dragon characters. The next, she was gone, leaving behind a husband who didn't know how to be soft and a son who forgot how to trust the world. That was 18 months ago. 18 months of watching Avery fold inward like paper in rain. The boy who once built elaborate Lego cities and performed magic tricks for housekeepers now spent hours staring at walls. His stutter, barely noticeable before, now trapped words in his throat like frightened birds. School became a battleground. The other kids at his exclusive private academy smelled weakness, the way sharks smell blood. "Look, it's the robot boy," they'd whisper. "His dad's so rich. He probably has a replacement mom on order." They knocked books from his hands, mimicked his stutter, turned his father's success into ammunition for their cruelty. Corbin tried everything money could buy. The best child psychologists in Manhattan, art therapy retreats in Switzerland, educational trips to museums and national parks. He hired reading specialists, social coaches, even a former Disney performer who taught confidence through improv games. Nothing worked. Every night, Corbin would find Avery hunched over fantasy novels, lost in worlds where heroes conquered darkness and families stayed together. The boy who used to chatter endlessly about dragons and magic now communicated in nods and shrugs. The breaking point came during a parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Henderson, Avery's 4th-grade teacher, leaned across her desk with that practice sympathy teachers reserved for difficult conversations. "Mr. Thorne, Avery wrote an essay today. The assignment was my hero. Most children wrote about firefighters or astronauts. Avery wrote 3 words. Nobody. Everyone leaves." That night, alone in his study overlooking the dark Atlantic, Corbin wept for the first time since the funeral. Success meant nothing when your child wouldn't look at you. Power meant nothing when you couldn't protect the person you loved most from the world's sharp edges. He'd built an empire, but he was losing his son. That's when fate intervened in the form of a documentary. Corbin was channel surfing, unable to sleep, when he stumbled across a program about America's foster care system. The statistics hit him like physical blows. 400,000 children waiting for permanent homes. Black children, especially boys, waiting longer than anyone else, not months, but years. Many aging out at 18 with nowhere to go, no family to call when life got hard. The documentary featured brief profiles of waiting children. Their faces filled the screen for seconds at a time. Hopeful eyes, careful smiles, each carrying invisible burdens that would crush most adults. Then came Malik Osei's segment. 10 years old, bright smile that reached his eyes. a handwritten story titled Finding Home that made Corbin's chest tight with recognition. This child, who had every reason to be bitter, radiated the kind of warmth Corbin's house had lost. But what happened when these two worlds collided would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in a Brooklyn group home, Malik was organizing bedtime stories for the younger kids, never knowing that his life was about to change in ways that would challenge everything both families thought they knew about love, loss, and what it really means to belong. To understand how desperate Corbin Thorne had become, you need to see him where the cameras never went. Not in the mahogany-paneled boardroom where Fortune 500 executives hung on his every word, but at his kitchen table at 6:30 a.m., eating cereal alone while his son's untouched breakfast grew cold upstairs. The man who commanded billion-dollar mergers couldn't get his own child to come downstairs for pancakes. Every morning followed the same heartbreaking routine. Corbin would prepare Avery's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, just like his mother used to make. He'd set the table for two, pour orange juice, even arrange the syrup bottles in a perfect line. Then he'd wait, and wait, and wait. Eventually, Avery would appear, pale and hollow-eyed, sliding into his chair without a word. He'd take 3 bites, push the food around his plate, then disappear back to his room. Corbin would sit there for another 20 minutes, staring at those abandoned dinosaur pancakes, wondering where he'd lost his son. Do you know a child who's lost their spark? That light in their eyes that makes them race to show you crayon drawings and beg for one more bedtime story? Avery's light had been extinguished so completely that even his own father felt like a stranger in his presence. The bullying at Westfield Academy had escalated from cruel whispers to open warfare. Last Tuesday, a group of boys cornered Avery near the library, snatching his worn copy of The Hobbit and tossing it into the fountain. When Avery tried to retrieve it, his stutter kicked in so severely he couldn't form words, just painful, trapped sounds that made the other kids laugh harder. MMIBB book, he'd finally managed, tears streaming down his face as ink bled from the waterlogged pages. Maybe your daddy can buy you a new one, sneered Marcus Wellington, whose own father was merely a federal judge. Oh, wait, he could buy you anything except friends. That afternoon, Avery's teacher called. Not about the bullying. She'd somehow missed that entirely. About his academic performance. Mr. Thorne, Avery's grades have dropped significantly. His essays are shorter each week. Yesterday's assignment was supposed to be 500 words about his summer vacation. He wrote 12 words. I went places. They were nice. I came home. The end. Corbin had taken Avery to 7 countries that summer. Private jets, 5-star resorts, exclusive experiences most adults could only dream of. Safari in Kenya, castles in Scotland, swimming with dolphins in the Maldives. Each destination chosen carefully, researched obsessively, planned to create magical memories. Avery had stared out airplane windows like he was looking through prison bars. The expensive therapy sessions weren't helping either. Dr. Marianne Foster, Manhattan's most sought-after child psychologist, charged $400 per hour to sit across from Avery in her pristine office, while he answered every question with variations of, I don't know, or it's fine. He's processing grief, Dr. Foster would tell Corbin after each session. These things take time. Time, as if Corbin hadn't already spent 18 months watching his son disappear piece by piece. As if he hadn't already exhausted every resource, called in every favor, tried every approach his money could buy. The private tutors came and went. The social coaches made careful notes about breakthrough moments that never materialized. Even Father Miguel from St. Catherine's, the priest who'd married Corbin and Elena, left their weekly visits looking defeated. Sometimes, Father Miguel had said quietly, children need more than adults can give them. Sometimes they need each other. But Avery didn't want friends. He'd built walls so high that even his father couldn't scale them. Success means nothing when your child won't look at you. The board meetings became torture. Corbin would sit at the head of the conference table, signing deals worth hundreds of millions, while his mind stayed trapped in that kitchen with the cold dinosaur pancakes. His assistant learned to block his calendar for personal emergencies that were really just him sitting in his car outside Avery's school, hoping to catch a glimpse of his son smiling. It never happened. The worst part wasn't the silence. It wasn't even the stuttering or the failing grades. The worst part was the fear he saw in Avery's eyes. Not fear of the bullies or the world outside, but fear of letting anyone close enough to leave again. Elena's death hadn't just taken away Avery's mother. It had taught him that loving someone meant losing them. 3 weeks before Corbin discovered that documentary, he'd found something that made his blood run cold. Hidden under Avery's mattress was a notebook filled with stories. Not homework assignments, but elaborate fantasies about orphan heroes who lived alone in towers, never needing anyone, never getting hurt. One story began. Prince Ash lived in the tallest tower in the kingdom. He had everything he needed and never had to worry about people leaving, because no people ever came. This made him very safe and very sad, but mostly very safe. Another story was titled The Boy Who Couldn't Be Broken, and featured protagonists who turned his heart to stone so nothing could hurt him again. Reading those stories, Corbin finally understood. His son wasn't just grieving his mother's death. He was protecting himself from ever experiencing that kind of loss again. And that meant protecting himself from his father, too. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. In trying to help Avery heal, Corbin had been part of the problem. Every expensive solution, every new expert, every desperate attempt to fix what was broken had reinforced the same message. Avery was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved exactly as he was. That night, Corbin made a decision that would have shocked his business rivals. Instead of flying to Tokyo for a merger that could have netted his company $2 billion, he called his assistant and cleared his schedule for a month. "Sir," Janet's voice carried barely concealed surprise, "the Yamamoto deal will happen without me," Corbin said firmly. "I have more important business to handle." For the first time in his career, something mattered more than money. But as Corbin settled in to focus entirely on rebuilding his relationship with Avery, he had no idea that the answer he was searching for wouldn't come from within their broken family. It would come from expanding it in a way that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, race, and what it really means to belong. The morning he decided to research adoption, Avery had another breakdown at school. This time, the bullying had escalated beyond words. Marcus Wellington had accidentally spilled chocolate milk all over Avery's presentation about medieval castles, ruining weeks of careful work. Avery didn't cry this time. He didn't stutter or try to clean up the mess. He simply walked out of the classroom, out of the building, and started walking home, a 12-mile journey he attempted in his school uniform and dress shoes. The school called when they couldn't find him. The police found him 3 hours later, sitting on a bench at a bus stop, staring at nothing. "Why were you walking home, son?" the officer asked gently. Avery's answer broke Corbin's heart. "Because home is the only place nobody expects me to be happy." That night, as Corbin watched his son retreat once again to his room, he realized that everything money could buy had bought them nothing but isolation. Avery needed something Corbin couldn't purchase. He needed to matter to someone who chose him, not someone obligated to love him. He needed a brother. And 30 miles away, a boy named Malik Osei was about to become the answer to a prayer Corbin didn't even know he was praying. While Avery had everything and felt empty, Malik Osei had nothing and overflowed with joy. His world was a cramped group home in Brooklyn where 12 kids shared 4 bedrooms, where dinner was whatever the state could afford, and where the biggest luxury was getting hot water for your shower. Yet every evening, you'd find Malik in the common room, surrounded by a circle of younger children, weaving stories that made them forget their troubles. "Once upon a time," Malik would begin, his voice rich with warmth despite missing his 2 front teeth, "there lived a dragon who was terrible at being scary. Every time he tried to roar, he sneezed instead. Every time he tried to breathe fire, bubbles came out." The kids would giggle, their faces lighting up as Malik acted out the clumsy dragon's adventures, complete with exaggerated sneezes and imaginary bubble blowing. For 30 minutes each night, that overcrowded group home transformed into a magical kingdom where anything was possible. Mrs. Rodriguez, the night supervisor, would watch from the doorway, shaking her head in amazement. In 23 years of fostering, she'd never seen a child carry such light. Most kids who'd been through what Malik had experienced, bouncing between 11 different placements in 7 years, built walls around their hearts. Malik built bridges. His mother, Keisha Osei, had died when he was 3. Not from violence or addiction or any of the tragedies that usually land children in the system, but from cancer that ravaged her body faster than doctors could fight it. In her final weeks, she'd sung him lullabies in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. "Baby boy," she'd whisper to the pain medication fog. "Promise me you'll keep singing. The world's going to try to make you hard, but you stay soft. You hear me? You stay soft." Malik had kept that promise, even when staying soft hurt more than building walls would have. His first foster family, the Johnsons in Queens, had meant well, but couldn't handle a grieving toddler who woke up screaming for his mama. They returned him after 3 months with apologetic smiles and relief in their eyes. The Hendersons in the Bronx kept him for 2 years, long enough for him to start calling him Grandma and Grandpa, long enough to believe he'd found his forever home. When Mr. Henderson's diabetes complications required full-time care, they couldn't manage a young child anymore. The social worker came on a Tuesday morning while Malik was eating cereal, watching cartoons in his favorite Superman pajamas. Just for a little while, Mrs. Henderson had promised through her tears. "Until we figure things out." That was 4 years ago. Malik had learned not to unpack all his belongings in new places. But here's what separated Malik from every other child in the system. Instead of letting rejection harden his heart, he used it to recognize pain in others. When 7-year-old Carlos arrived at the group home, traumatized and refusing to speak, Malik didn't push. He simply sat beside Carlos during meals, sharing his cookies without expecting anything in return. When 9-year-old Destiny cried herself to sleep every night, Malik would hum lullabies from the next bed, the same ones his mother had sung to him. The caseworkers documented his remarkable emotional intelligence. Malik demonstrates exceptional empathy and leadership qualities. He organizes reading circles, mediates conflict between younger residents, and has become an unofficial big brother to multiple children in care. What they couldn't document was the magic that happened when Malik walked into a room. Broken toys mysteriously got fixed. Homework became collaborative adventures. Kids who'd been in the system for years started smiling again. Take the great crayon crisis of last September. The art supplies had run out, and the younger kids were devastated. While other children complained or gave up, Malik organized a imagination art contest. No crayons needed, just fingers traced on fog windows, stories drawn in spill flour, murals created from torn magazine pages. Art isn't about having the fancy stuff, he'd explained to 5-year-old Tanya, who was crying because she couldn't color her rainbow. Art is about seeing beautiful things that aren't there yet and making them real. By the end of the week, their refrigerator was covered with imagination art that made visiting social workers stop and stare. The room felt less like an institution and more like a home where creativity mattered more than resources. The statistics surrounding children like Malik were heartbreaking. Black children made up only 14% of America's youth population, but represented 23% of those in foster care. Black boys like Malik faced even steeper odds, often waiting years longer for adoption than other children, frequently aging out of the system without ever finding a permanent family. But Malik didn't know these numbers. He knew that every night. He helped younger kids with their homework. He knew that when the heating broke last winter, he'd organize Fortnite, using blankets and flashlights to keep everyone warm and distracted. He knew that when Mrs. Rodriguez worked double shifts, he could get all 12 kids fed, bathed, and in bed without a single meltdown. He also knew how to hope without expectations. The family interviews had become routine. Prospective parents would visit, usually looking for babies or toddlers, children young enough to mold, young enough to forget their past trauma. At 10 years old, Malik was considered older, carrying invisible baggage that made him less desirable to families seeking picture-perfect adoption stories. He'd learned to smile politely during these visits, to answer questions about school and hobbies, to not mention the nightmares or the way he still sometimes called out for his mama in his sleep. He'd learned to handle the disappointment when visits didn't lead to placements, when families chose someone else, when caseworkers delivered news with sad smiles and reassuring lies about the right family being out there somewhere. But Malik had written something that would change everything. During a creative writing assignment at his public school, he'd penned a short story titled Finding Home. It wasn't about the brick buildings or the legal paperwork or the perfect families from TV commercials. It was about finding people who saw him, really saw him, and chose to stay. The story began, "Home isn't a place you go. Home is a feeling you get when someone looks at you and decides you're worth keeping. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Not because you're perfect, but because your imperfect fits with their imperfect in a way that makes both people whole." His teacher, Miss Patricia Williams, had read those words 3 times before walking to principal's office with tears in her eyes. She'd made copies, sent them to his caseworker, filed them in his portfolio with a note. This child has wisdom beyond his years and love beyond his circumstances. That story, along with a grainy video of Malik reading to the younger children, would eventually land on the desk of a desperate billionaire 30 miles away who was learning that money couldn't buy the one thing his son needed most. But on this particular Wednesday night, as Malik tucked blankets around sleeping children and whispered goodnight prayers that included everyone he'd ever loved and lost, he had no idea that his world was about to collide with forces that would test every lesson his mother had taught him about staying soft in a hard world. The first time Corbin Thorne laid eyes on Malik Osei, the boy was teaching a social worker how to make paper airplanes from case files. "You gotta fold it like this, Miss Janet," Malik explained patiently, his small fingers working the paper with precision. "See, if you just crease at random, it won't fly straight. But if you take your time, fold it with purpose." He launched the makeshift airplane across the conference room, where it soared in a perfect arc before landing softly on Corbin's expensive briefcase. "Sorry, mister," Malik said, jumping up to retrieve his creation. "I was showing Miss Janet that even boring paperwork can fly if you know how to fold it right." It wasn't love at first sight. It was hope at first breath. Corbin had expected this moment to feel formal, clinical. Official meetings with lawyers and case workers. Careful questions about compatibility and expectations. Instead, he found himself watching a 10-year-old boy transform a sterile government office into a place where laughter lived. "I read your story," Corbin said quietly as Malik smoothed out the paper airplane. "About finding home." Malik's eyes widened slightly. "You did? Most grown-ups don't really read kid stuff unless they have to." "I have to," Corbin admitted. "My son, he's forgotten how to be happy. I thought maybe your story could teach me something about that." For the next 2 hours, they talked, not about adoption procedures or legal requirements, but about books and dragons and whether superheroes ever got scared when they had to save the world. Malik asked thoughtful questions about Avery, showing genuine concern for a boy he'd never met. Corbin found himself sharing details about his son's struggles that he'd never told expensive therapists. "Maybe he's not broken," Malik suggested when Corbin described Avery's withdrawal. "Maybe he's just protecting himself. Sometimes when people hurt you real bad, you gotta build walls. But walls work both ways. They keep bad stuff out, but they also keep good stuff out too." Wisdom from a child who'd been abandoned 11 times. As they prepared to leave, Malik hesitated at the door. "Mr. Corbin, if I came to live with you in Avery, would I still be allowed to visit the little kids here? They're going to need someone to tell them stories." That question sealed it. This wasn't a child looking for rescue. This was a child who rescued others. 3 weeks later, Corbin's publicist called an emergency meeting. "Sir, we have a problem," Marcus Webb said, sliding a tablet across the mahogany conference table. The announcement leaked. The headlines were brutal. "Billionaire CEO adopts black child. PR stunt or true altruism?" Corbin Thorne's calculated compassion. Adopting for applause? Virtue signaling or genuine love? The Thorne adoption controversy. But it was a social media explosion that truly staggered him. Within hours, #ThorneAdoption was trending nationally, with opinions ranging from skeptical to savage. At RealTalk_Tina, rich white man adopts black kid equals instant saint status. Meanwhile, actual black families can't get approved because they don't have enough bedrooms. Make it make sense. At Corporate Watch, funny how Thor announces his adoption right before his company's diversity audit. Coincidence? I think not. At Justice for All, that poor child. Hope he's prepared to be paraded around at charity galas as proof of daddy's woke credentials. The comments cut deeper than any business rival's attack ever had. These weren't just criticisms of his motives. They were accusations that he was using a child's need for love as a tool for public relations. Even worse were the comments questioning Malik's safety and well-being. Members of the black community, rightfully protective of their children, worried aloud about cultural erasure, about a boy losing his identity in a world of privilege and whiteness. At SisterSpeak_, this baby gonna forget where he came from real quick. Rich folks love collecting black children like trophies. Pray he remembers his roots. At Black Mama Bear, y'all remember what happened to other black kids adopted by rich white families? They grow up confused, disconnected, ashamed of their heritage. This breaks my heart. The corporate world wasn't kinder. Board members who'd smiled his face now whisper behind closed doors. Midlife crisis, some said. Desperate attempt at relevance, others suggested. His assistant intercepted dozens of calls from business associates offering unsolicited advice about the optics of the situation. But the cruelest reactions came from the place that should have been safe. Avery School. The hallways of Westfield Academy buzzed with gossip the morning after the news broke. Marcus Wellington, Avery's primary tormentor, had found new ammunition that made his previous attack seem gentle. So your dad's by your brother now? Marcus cornered Avery near the lockers, his voice loud enough for half the hallway to hear. What's next? Gonna buy you some friends too? Maybe he figured one broken kid wasn't enough, added Jessica Crawford, whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels. Now he gets to look like a hero while having 2 freaks for sons. Avery's stutter kicked in with devastating force. H's and not. But the words wouldn't come. They never came when he needed them most. He's not what? Marcus pressed, mimicking Avery's speech impediment. Not going to be your real brother? Everyone knows rich people adopt for the tax breaks and the photo ops. That afternoon, Avery came home with a black eye and a suspension letter. He'd finally fought back, swinging wildly at Marcus until teachers pulled him apart. But the victory fell hollow because the words still echoed in his head. Your dad had to buy you a brother. At home, Corbin faced his own crisis of conscience. At 3 a.m., he stood in his study, surrounded by newspaper clippings and printouts of social media comments. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on him like a physical force. Was he really doing this for the right reasons? Had his desperation to help Avery blinded him to the complexity of transracial adoption? The doubt crept in like poison. Maybe the critics were right. Maybe he was just another privileged white man who thought money could solve problems it had no business touching. Maybe Malik would be better off with a family who shared his cultural background, who understood his experiences in ways Corbin never could. His phone rang. Marcus Webb, the publicist, calling with damage control strategies. Sir, we can spin this, Marcus said before Corbin could speak. Position it as a company initiative. Corporate social responsibility. We can... No, Corbin said firmly. This isn't about the company. This isn't about public relations. This is about family. But the optics don't matter if we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. Even as he said the words, Corbin wondered if he believed them. The morning news shows were picking up the story. Entertainment Tonight had called for interviews. His company's stock price fluctuated with each new headline. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Malik was experiencing his own storm. The group home erupted in chaos as reporters camped outside, trying to catch glimpses of the chosen child. Photographers with long lenses turned innocent moments into suspicious photo opportunities. Social workers fielded hundreds of calls from journalists wanting exclusive access to Malik's story. Mrs. Rodriguez gathered all the children in the common room for a serious conversation. Malik, baby, you know what's happening out there? She asked gently. Malik nodded, his usual brightness dimmed by confusion. People are saying mean things about Mr. Corbin. And about me. They think I'm going to forget who I am. Are you scared? Malik thought for a long moment. A little, but my mama always said scared and brave can live in the same heart. Maybe the mean people are scared too. Maybe they don't know how to fold their fear into something that flies straight. Even under pressure, even with the world watching and judging, this child was trying to understand rather than attack. The media circus reached its peak when a prominent television host dedicated an entire segment to the Thorne adoption controversy, featuring a panel of experts debating whether transracial adoption was beneficial or harmful, whether wealth could compensate for cultural differences, whether Corbin's motives were pure or calculated. But none of them knew what mattered most. Two boys who needed each other were about to discover that family isn't about perfection or public approval. It's about choosing to stay when the world tells you to leave. Share this if you believe love conquers judgment, because what happened when Malik finally came home would silence every critic and transform 3 lives in ways no one saw coming. 2 boys, 1 roof, 0 roadmap. Malik's first night in the Thorne mansion, he stood in the doorway of his new bedroom, afraid to step inside. The space was larger than the entire common area of his group home. The bed looked like something from a hotel catalog, complete with more pillows than he'd ever seen in one place. A massive desk sat beneath windows that overlooked ground so vast they disappeared into darkness. "This is all mine," he whispered to Corbin, who hovered nearby, unsure whether to stay or give the boy space. "All yours." Corbin confirmed. "We can change anything you don't like. Different colors, different furniture. Whatever makes you comfortable." Malik walked carefully to the bed, running his hand over the silk comforter. In the group home, blankets were thin and shared. Here, he had 5 different coverings, each softer than anything he'd ever touched. "Can I?" Malik hesitated, then pushed forward with characteristic honesty. "Can I keep my door open, in case the little kids need me at night?" Corbin's heart cracked. "Malik, the little kids aren't here. You're safe now. You don't have to take care of anyone else." "But what if they have nightmares? Who's going to tell them stories?" That first week, Malik barely slept. The silence was overwhelming after years of rooms filled with whispered conversations, crying babies, and the constant sound of other people breathing. He'd lie awake listening to nothing, wondering if the quiet meant he was truly alone or finally safe. Meanwhile, Avery watched this stranger navigate their house like he was walking through a museum. Malik would pause before touching anything expensive, ask permission before opening the refrigerator, eat only small portions as if rationing food that might run out. At breakfast that first morning, Corbin prepared his usual elaborate spread. Fresh fruit, artisanal pastries, imported jams, 3 types of juice. Malik stared at the feast with wide eyes. "How many people are coming to eat?" he asked. "Just us," Corbin replied, settling into his chair. "Help yourself to whatever you want." Malik selected 1 piece of toast and a small glass of orange juice. When Corbin encouraged him to take more, Malik shook his head politely. "This is plenty. We should save some for later." Avery, who'd been pushing eggs around his plate in sullen silence, looked up for the first time. "There's more in the kitchen. Like a lot more." "Really?" Malik's eyes widened. Every day," Avery confirmed, something shifting in his expression. It was their first real exchange. The cultural differences went deeper than material abundance. Malik had grown up in a world where everyone shared everything, where community meant survival, where looking out for others was as natural as breathing. The Thorne house operated on different principles: privacy, personal space, individual ownership. When Malik automatically started clearing dishes after meals, Corbin gently stopped him. "We have people for that." "People?" "Staff. Housekeepers." Malik looked confused. "But I can clean up after myself. I always have." "You don't have to anymore." But Malik continued clearing his own dishes, unable to shake the habit of self-reliance in his world. Adults were temporary fixtures who might disappear without warning. Better to depend on yourself than risk disappointment. The boys circled each other like cautious cats, neither sure how to bridge the gap between their different worlds. Avery had never shared his space with anyone. His room was his sanctuary, organized exactly how he liked it, filled with books arranged by series and size. Malik had never had private space, never owned enough possessions to worry about organization. Their first real conversation happened 3 days in, when Malik noticed Avery reading The Lord of the Rings during breakfast. "Is that the one with the little guy who has to carry the ring?" Malik asked. Avery nodded cautiously. "I always wondered about that story," Malik continued. "Like, why didn't the big eagle just fly him there in the first place? Would have saved everybody a lot of trouble." For the first time in months, Avery's face lit up with genuine interest. Actually, there are several theories about that. The eagles are basically divine messengers, so they can't interfere directly with mortal affairs unless... He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd been speaking without stuttering, without fear. Malik smiled. "See? I knew you were smart. Want to tell me the rest?" That afternoon, they sat in the library while Avery explained Middle-earth geography with a passion he'd kept locked away for so long. Malik listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not just being polite. "You know," Malik said when Avery finished, "you should be a teacher someday. You explain things so they make sense." It was the first compliment Avery had received from someone his age in over a year. Corbin watched these tentative connections from a distance, afraid to interfere with the delicate process of two wounded children learning to trust each other. He'd taken extended leave from his company, clearing his schedule to be present for every step of this adjustment period. The breakthrough came during their second week together, when Malik discovered the old greenhouse behind the main house. "What's this place?" he asked, pressing his nose against the dirty glass panels. "Storage, mostly," Corbin explained. "It used to be Elena's, Avery's mother's garden. She loved growing things. After we just couldn't maintain it. The greenhouse was a graveyard of abandoned dreams. Dead plants in cracked pots, rusted tools hanging on hooks, bags of dried soil stacked in corners. But Malik saw a possibility where others saw a decay. "Could we fix it?" he asked. "Make things grow again?" Avery, who'd been quiet during the tour, suddenly spoke up. "Mom had orchids, really beautiful ones, purple and white." "Orchids are tricky," Malik said thoughtfully. "But my first foster mom, Mrs. Johnson, she taught me about plants before I had to leave. Said they're like people. Sometimes they look dead, but if you give them the right care, they can come back stronger." That afternoon, all three of them worked in the greenhouse. Corbin hadn't touched these tools since Elena's death, but watching his sons, and yes, they were both his sons now, carefully transplant seedlings into fresh soil felt like resurrection. Malik worked with practiced efficiency, his hands gentle with the delicate roots. Avery followed his lead, asking questions about soil composition and watering schedules. For the first time since his mother's death, Avery was engaged in something that connected him to her memory without causing pain. "You know what this needs?" Malik said, surveying their work. "Stories. Plants grow better when you talk to them. That's not scientifically proven," Avery said automatically. "Maybe not," Malik grinned, "but it can't hurt. Besides, everything needs stories. Stories help things make sense." As the days passed, small rituals developed. Morning chess games where Malik's intuitive strategy challenged Avery's methodical approach. Evening movies where they quote dialogue in unison, building a shared language of inside jokes. Homework sessions where Avery's academic strengths balanced Malik's creative problem-solving. But it was in the greenhouse that their real bond grew. Working side by side in the dirt, they began sharing the stories that shaped them. Malik told Avery about his mother's lullabies, about the foster families who'd meant well but couldn't stay, about learning to find family in unexpected places. Avery, slowly, began sharing his own pain, about watching his mother collapse, about the funeral where everyone said things that didn't help, about feeling responsible for his father's sadness. "You know what I think?" Malik said one afternoon as they watered the new seedlings. "I think maybe your mom sent me here. Like, she knew you needed someone who understood about missing people you love." Avery considered this. "You really think she could do that? From wherever she is?" "I think moms are magic like that. Even when they're not here anymore, they still find ways to take care of their kids." In a house full of expensive things, they found magic in the abandoned corner where life was slowly returning. The orchids hadn't bloomed yet, but green shoots pushed through dark soil, reaching toward light streaming through newly cleaned glass panels. Corbin would find them there most evenings, talking quietly as they tended their growing garden. The sight filled him with something he'd forgotten how to feel. Contentment that had nothing to do with stock prices or corporate achievements. But outside their fragile bubble, the real test was waiting. School would resume soon, and both boys would face a world that wasn't ready to understand their unconventional family. The bullies who tormented them separately were about to discover what happened when wounded children learned to protect each other. Monday morning at Westfield Academy arrived like a storm front, heavy with the promise of conflict. Avery walked through the school gates with his shoulders straighter than they'd been in months, but his hands still trembled as he gripped his backpack straps. Beside him, Malik took in the manicured lawns, the imposing brick buildings, the clusters of children whose clothes probably cost more than most families spent on groceries. "This place looks like Hogwarts," Malik whispered, genuine awe in his voice. "More like a prison," Avery muttered back. Marcus Wellington spotted them before they'd made it halfway across the courtyard. The boy who'd made Avery's life miserable for months now had fresh ammunition, and his eyes gleamed with predatory excitement as he approached with his usual pack of followers. Well, Marcus announced loudly enough for half the courtyard to hear. "Look who brought his charity case to school." Avery's stutter kicked in immediately. He's not. "He's not what?" Marcus interrupted, circling them like a shark scenting blood. "Not going to fit in here?" Not going to last when he realizes this isn't some inner-city school where they lower the standards. Malik studied Marcus with the same calm attention he'd once given to broken toys at the group home. The boy was tall for his age, expensive haircut perfectly styled, uniform pressed to perfection, but his eyes held the kind of desperate cruelty that usually came from being hurt by someone else first. "You must be Marcus," Malik said pleasantly. "Avery told me about you." Marcus blinked, thrown off by the lack of fear in Malik's voice. "Did he now? What exactly did he tell you?" "That you're really good at making people feel small," Malik replied with perfect honesty. "Must take a lot of practice to get that good at something." The insult was delivered so politely that Marcus needed a moment to realize he'd been insulted at all. When it hit him, his face flushed red. "Listen, scholarship boy." "Actually," Malik interrupted gently, "I'm not on scholarship. Mr. Corbin pays full tuition for both of us, same as your parents pay for you. So we're really just two kids trying to get an education, right?" The crowd that had gathered to watch Avery's usual humiliation murmured with interest. This wasn't going according to script. Marcus, realizing he was losing control of the situation, decided to escalate. He stepped closer to Avery, shoving him hard enough to send him stumbling backward. "Your dad had to buy you a brother because nobody else would put up with a stammering freak." Marcus snarled. That's when it happened. What happened next defied every expectation. Instead of shrinking away or fighting back with fists, Malik stepped between them with a laugh that was genuinely amused rather than defensive. "You know what you remind me of?" Malik said to Marcus, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "This story my first foster mom used to tell about a giant who lived under a bridge. Big, scary guy, always yelling at people, making everyone afraid to cross over to the good side." Marcus's friends exchanged confused glances. This wasn't how victims were supposed to respond. "But here's the thing about that giant," Malik continued, still smiling. "He wasn't actually mean because he was strong. He was mean because he was scared. Scared that if people got to the other side of the bridge, they'd realize he wasn't as important as he pretended to be. Scared that maybe he was just as lonely as everyone else." The courtyard had gone completely silent. Even the teachers monitoring morning arrival had stopped their conversations to listen. Marcus's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something that might have been recognition. "I'm not scared of anything," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Course not," Malik agreed easily. "Giants never are. That's what makes them giants, right? But you know what I learned about giants from all those stories? They're usually just regular people who got really good at acting bigger than they feel inside." He paused, then added with devastating gentleness, "Must be exhausting, having to be scary all the time. When do you get to just be Marcus?" Something cracked in Marcus's carefully constructed armor. For just a moment, the 11-year-old boy beneath the bully facade showed through, uncertain, defensive, maybe even a little ashamed. But the moment passed. Marcus's face hardened again, and he reached the nuclear option, Avery's most treasured possession. You think you're so smart? Marcus snatched the worn copy of The Hobbit from Avery's hands and raised it above his head. Let's see how smart you are when. Wait, Avery said. Everyone turned to stare. Avery Thorne, who hadn't spoken clearly in public for months, was standing straighter than anyone had seen him stand all year. You want to know something about giants, Marcus? Avery's voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the courtyard. No stutter, no fear, just calm determination. In every story they fall, and they always fall the same way, by underestimating the people they think are too small to matter. He gestured to Malik, who was watching with proud amazement. My brother taught me that. See, you've been trying to make me small for months. And it worked, because I was already scared of being small. But now I know something I didn't know before. Avery stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that the bigger boy had to look down to meet his eyes. I'm not small. I never was. I was just folded up. But Malik taught me how to unfold, how to find the shape I'm supposed to be. And that shape, it's not scared of you anymore. The crowd was holding its breath. In 4 years at Westfield Academy, no one had ever seen Avery Thorne stand up to anyone, let alone deliver a speech that would have impressed the debate team. Marcus stood there holding the book above his head, suddenly looking ridiculous rather than threatening. The gesture that should have been his moment of triumph had become his exposure. You can throw my book in the fountain again, Avery continued calmly. You can make fun of my stutter, call my family fake, whatever makes you feel bigger. But you can't make me small anymore, because now I know the difference between being alone and being lonely, and I'm not alone anymore. Malik beamed like Avery had just solved world hunger. Marcus, completely outmaneuvered and stripped of his power, slowly lowered the book. The courtyard remained silent, waiting to see what would happen next. That's when Malik did something that changed everything. He walked over to Marcus, not aggressively, not defensively, just with the same calm kindness he'd shown crying children at the group home, and said quietly, "Hey, you know what? If you ever get tired of being the giant under the bridge, there's always room at our lunch table. No requirements except showing up as yourself instead of whoever you think you need to be." Then he turned to the crowd of students who'd gathered to watch the show. Same goes for everyone else. Avery and I are starting a new lunch table today. No bullies allowed, but former bullies who want to try being just kids, those are welcome. The bell rang, breaking the spell, and students began moving toward their classes. But something fundamental had shifted in the ecosystem of Westfield Academy. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the school. The no one eats alone table, Malik had named it during second period, occupied the center of the cafeteria. Avery and Malik sat there with their lunch trays, and slowly, cautiously, other students began joining them. First came the obvious outcasts, Jenny Martinez, who was teased for her thick glasses, Tommy Chun, who stuttered even worse than Avery used to, Rebecca Foster, whose parents' divorce had made her a target for gossip. But then something unexpected happened. Popular kids started sitting down too. Not the core bullies, but the ones who'd stood by and watched, tired of pretending cruelty was entertaining. Even some of Marcus's former followers drifted over, curious about this table where conversation seemed to flow without the constant undercurrent of judgment. Principal Davidson, making her usual lunch rounds, stopped short when she saw the crowd gathered around what had previously been the loneliest table in her cafeteria. "What's happening here?" she asked Malik, who was in the middle of telling a story that had the entire table laughing. "Just lunch, Mrs. Davidson," Malik replied with his trademark smile. Turns out lunch is a lot more fun when everyone's invited. That afternoon, Principal Davidson made her first positive phone call to Corbin Thorne in 4 years of his son's enrollment. "Mr. Thorne, I wanted to call and tell you about something remarkable that happened today. Your boys, and I hope you don't mind me calling them both yours, they've started something special here. Like this if you've seen bullies back down from kindness, because what Avery and Malik accomplished in one day would transform their entire school community and prove that sometimes the best way to defeat darkness is to invite it into the light. Corbin learned that love means letting go of control on a humid Saturday morning in the Bronx, watching his 10-year-old son teach a room full of teenagers how to make their voices heard. The community center on 149th Street looked nothing like the polished conference rooms where Corbin usually conducted business. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Folding chairs wobbled on uneven legs, and the air conditioning had given up sometime during the Clinton administration. But as Malik stood before 30 kids from various foster homes, sharing his story with the kind of confidence that money couldn't buy, Corbin realized this was the most important meeting he'd ever attended. The thing about being in the system, Malik was saying, his voice carrying easily to the back of the room, is that people see you as broken, like you're a problem that needs fixing instead of a person who needs loving. Heads nodded throughout the audience. These kids knew exactly what he meant. It had been Corbin's idea to establish the mentorship program, but it was Malik who'd insisted on coming to the kids instead of asking them to come to Manhattan. They need to see that someone who looks like them, who's been where they are, made it out and came back, Malik had explained. Not to rescue them, but to remind them they're already whole. Dr. Amara Johnson, the therapist Corbin had found for Malik, sat in the back row taking notes. She was everything the expensive Manhattan specialists weren't: warm, direct, and intimately familiar with the specific challenges black children faced in predominantly white environments. More importantly, she was someone Malik chose to trust rather than someone imposed upon him. Dr. Amara doesn't try to fix me, Malik had explained to Avery one afternoon. She just helps me understand all the feelings I already have, like organizing a messy room so you can find what you're looking for. The cultural bridge building had been delicate work. Corbin quickly learned that good intentions weren't enough. He needed to listen more than he spoke, learn more than he taught, and create space for Malik to maintain connections that predated their family. Every other Sunday, they drove to Mount Olive Baptist Church in Harlem, where Malik had attended services during a stay with the Henderson family. Pastor Williams, a man whose handshake could crack walnuts and whose hugs could heal hearts, had become an unofficial grandfather figure. "Young man," Pastor Williams would say to Malik after each service, "you remember who you are and where you come from. All this fancy living is blessing, but your roots run deeper than wealth." "Yes, sir," Malik would reply respectfully. "My mama always said roots and wings both matter. Roots to remember, wings to fly." Avery loved these Sunday visits too, though for different reasons. In this community where everyone looked out for everyone else's children, where meals were shared and stories were currency, he saw what family could look like when it extended beyond blood relations. Mrs. Henderson, despite her advanced age, still made sure both boys got extra helpings of her famous sweet potato pie. Deacon Roberts taught them card games that Elena would have banned from their house. Sister Margaret showed them how to braid friendship bracelets while sharing stories that made the entire church basement laugh. "These people aren't just nice to us," Avery observed on the drive home one Sunday. "They love us, like really love us." How did that happen so fast? Because, Malik explained patiently, love isn't about time. It's about recognition. They see something in us that connects to something in them. Community works like that. Everybody belongs to everybody. At home, the boys had developed their own rhythms. Mornings meant greenhouse duty, where Elena's orchids were finally beginning to show the first hints of buds. Afternoons were for homework, where Malik's creative problem-solving complemented Avery's methodical approach. Evenings belonged to their various projects, which seemed to multiply weekly. The No One Eats Alone initiative had grown beyond their lunch table. Working with the school administration, they'd established peer mediation training, conflict resolution workshops, and storytelling circles where students could share their experiences without judgment. Avery, whose stutter had virtually disappeared when he was helping others, had become the program's most effective advocate. "You know what I learned?" Avery told a room full of parents during a school presentation. "Bullies aren't born mean. They're made mean by people being mean to them first. If we can break that cycle, if we can show them what kindness looks like, most of them want to be kind too." Malik, sitting in the front row, beamed with pride. His brother had found his voice, but it was their collaborative project that truly demonstrated how far they'd come. Stories for Change was a non-profit organization, their non-profit organization that collected and published stories from children in foster care, adoption, and family transition. The idea had emerged from one of their greenhouse conversations. "Everyone talks about us," Malik had said while watering seedlings. "But nobody really listens to us. What if we made a place where kids could tell their own stories, in their own words?" Within 6 months, they received over 200 submissions from children across the country. Stories of loss and resilience, fear and hope, families found and families lost. Each story was carefully edited, with permission, and compiled into quarterly publications that were distributed to social workers, adoption agencies, and families considering foster care or adoption. The inaugural issue featured Malik's Finding Home story alongside Avery's essay titled, "How My Brother Taught Me to Unfold." The response had been overwhelming. Social workers reported that reading these authentic voices helped prospective families understand what children really needed, beyond material provision. "These kids are telling truths that adults have been afraid to hear," wrote Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, director of the National Foster Care Association, in her foreword to the second issue. "Their wisdom should humble us, and their resilience should inspire us to do better." Corporate sponsors had emerged organically, not because of Corbin's connections, but because of the boys' genuine passion and the program's measurable impact. Local businesses provided printing services. Shipping companies donated distribution, and child psychologists volunteered their time for trauma-informed editing guidance. The success attracted media attention, but this time the coverage was different. Instead of speculation about motives, reporters focused on results. Instead of questioning authenticity, they celebrated transformation. 2 years ago, Avery Thorne couldn't speak in public without severe anxiety, wrote journalist Maria Santos in a feature for the New York Times. Today, he's addressing conferences of social workers and inspiring policy changes in 3 states. His brother Malik, who spent 7 years in foster care, has become a nationally recognized advocate for children's voices in family services. Together, they're proving that healing happens when children are empowered to help other children. Corbin kept that article framed in his study, not because it mentioned his company or his wealth, but because it captured something he'd never achieved in decades of business success, a legacy that mattered beyond profit margins. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Marcus Wellington, the boy who'd once terrorized Avery, approached him after school one afternoon with uncharacteristic humility. "Hey," Marcus said awkwardly, I wrote something for your story project about what it's like when your parents expect you to be perfect all the time and you're scared you're not." He handed Malik a folded piece of paper and walked away quickly, as if afraid he might change his mind. That evening, as the boys read Marcus's raw, honest account of pressure and fear and the loneliness of being perceived as privilege, they understood something profound. Everyone had a story that deserved to be heard, even former bullies who were trying to become better people. "You know what this means?" Malik said, holding up Marcus's story. "What?" "It means we're all just kids trying to figure out how to belong somewhere, even the scary ones. From victims to leaders in less than 2 years. From broken family to healing force in their community. From 2 separate worlds to one shared mission that was changing lives far beyond their own." The boy who'd lost his mother and the boy who'd never had a stable home had found each other, and, in doing so, had found their purpose, reminding the world that every child's story matters, every voice deserves to be heard, and family can be created anywhere love is willing to take root and grow. The moment Corbin Thorne truly understood what had happened to his family came during a live television interview that was supposed to last 15 minutes and change 3 lives forever. CBS Morning Show host Janet Chin leaned forward across the polished studio desk, her expression carefully balanced between professional skepticism and genuine curiosity. The red recording light glowed steadily as cameras captured what millions of viewers would later call one of the most honest conversations about family they'd ever witnessed on television. "Mr. Thorne, when you first announced your intention to adopt Malik, critics suggested this was a calculated move for positive publicity. Now, 3 years later, what would you say to those early skeptics?" Corbin shifted in his chair, acutely aware that Malik and Avery were watching from the green room, probably critiquing his tie choice and reminding each other not to laugh if he said something embarrassing. The question he'd prepared for, the corporate speak answer about social responsibility and giving back, died in his throat. Instead, he found himself speaking a truth he'd never articulated before. "I'd say they were right to be skeptical," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of his usual boardroom authority, "because they understood something I didn't at the time. I thought I was adopting Malik to save him. I thought my wealth, my resources, my connections could rescue a child from a broken system." Janet Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. This wasn't the defensive response her producers had anticipated. "But that's not what happened, is it?" she prompted. Corbin shook his head, a smile spreading across his face. Not the practiced expression he wore for shareholder meetings, but something raw and real and completely unguarded. "No, it's not. Because here's what I discovered about rescue. It only works when it goes both ways. Malik didn't need saving. He needed belonging. And his voice caught slightly, I was the one who needed saving." The studio fell silent, except for the software of camera equipment. In 30 years of conducting interviews, Janet had rarely seen such authentic vulnerability from a corporate executive. "Can you elaborate on that?" "My son Avery was drowning in grief, and I was drowning in powerlessness," Corbin continued, the words flowing now like water through a broken dam. "All my money, all my success, all my connections, none of it could heal the hole his mother's death had torn in our lives. I was failing as a father, failing as a human being, and I didn't know how to fix it." He paused, collecting himself. "Then this 10-year-old boy walked into our lives, carrying more wisdom in his little finger than I'd accumulated in 50 years of living. He didn't just become Avery's brother. He became my teacher." In the green room, Malik nudged Avery. "Your dad's getting all emotional on TV." "Good," Avery whispered back. "Maybe now people will see what we see." Back in the studio, Janet leaned forward with genuine interest. "What did he teach you?" "That family isn't about blood or legal documents or even love," Corbin said. "It's about choice. Every day, Malik chose to see possibility where others saw problems. He chose to build bridges where others built walls. He chose to stay soft in a world that rewarded hardness. The man who thought he was giving everything discovered he was receiving everything. When Avery was struggling with bullies at school, I hired experts, changed schools, even considered homeschooling. Nothing worked. But Malik taught him that strength isn't about being bigger or louder than your problems. It's about being braver than your fear. He showed Avery that the best way to stop hurting is to help someone else stop hurting." Janet nodded, clearly moved by the transformation she was witnessing in real time. "And now both boys are running a nationally recognized nonprofit organization." "They are," Corbin said with unmistakable pride. Story for Change has collected over 1,000 submissions from children across the country. They're consulting with state agencies on policy reform. Avery, who couldn't speak in public 3 years ago, addressed Congress last month about the importance of sibling connections in foster care. He shook his head in amazement. "I spent decades building companies, accumulating wealth, achieving what the world calls success. But watching my sons help other children find their voices, that's the first time I've ever created something that truly matters." Janet smiled. "What would you say to families considering adoption, especially transracial adoption?" This was the question Corbin had been dreading, the one that required him to address the complicated realities of race and class and cultural identity that he was still learning to navigate. "I'd say humility is your most important qualification," he said carefully. "Love isn't enough. Good intentions aren't enough. You have to be willing to become a student in your own family, to recognize that your child brings gifts you don't have, wisdom you need, and connections to communities that will enrich all your lives if you're brave enough to embrace them." He paused, thinking of Sunday mornings at Mount Olive Baptist Church, of Dr. Amara's patient guidance, of the foster families who'd opened their hearts to welcome him into Malik's extended network of love. Malik hasn't lost his identity by joining our family. He's helped all of us find ours. He's taught us that strength comes from community, that healing happens in relationship, and that the best families aren't perfect. They're just committed to growing together. The interview continued for another 10 minutes. But those words, "Malik saved us," would become the soundbite that played on news programs across the country. not because it was scandalous or controversial, but because it was true in a way that transcended the usual talking points about charity and social responsibility. 3 years after the adoption that critics call fate became the most real thing in 3 lives. The ripple effects had spread far beyond their family. Westfield Academy had implemented the peer mediation program nationwide, reducing bullying incidents by 40% across all their campuses. The No One Eats Alone initiative had been adopted by over 200 schools in 15 states. Their nonprofit had influenced foster care legislation in 7 states, prioritizing sibling placement and child voice in placement decisions. But the most profound transformation was visible in the small moments that cameras never captured. Avery teaching violin to kids at the community center, his confidence radiating as he guided small fingers across strings. Malik organizing basketball tournaments at the group home, ensuring that every child got playing time regardless of skill level. Corbin attending every school play, every science fair, every awkward middle school concert. Not because he had to, but because he genuinely wanted to celebrate these children who taught him what joy looked like. The greenhouse behind their house had become a symbol of their journey. Elena's orchids bloom magnificently now, their purple and white petals a testament to patient tending and unconditional love. But they shared space with vegetables Malik had grown from seeds saved from his mother's garden, plants that somehow thrived in Hampton soil despite coming from Harlem earth. You know what I realized? Avery said one evening as they worked together among the plants. Mom did send Malik to us. Not like magic or anything, but like she knew what kind of family we needed to become. Malik smiled, his hands gentle with a tomato seedling. Maybe we just got lucky enough to find each other when we all needed finding. Corbin watched his sons from a greenhouse doorway, these 2 remarkable children who'd save each other, and in saving each other, had saved him too. The adoption that began as one desperate man's attempt to help his grieving son had become a masterclass in how families are built, not through blood or law or even love alone, but through the daily choice to see each other clearly, accept each other completely, and grow together into something none of them could have become alone. The man who owned 17 companies had finally learned to build something that couldn't be bought, a home where belonging was earned through presence, where love was measured in small daily kindnesses, and where 3 broken people had discovered that healing happens when you stop trying to fix each other and start helping each other fly. 5 years later, Corbin Thorne stands in the same kitchen where he once ate breakfast alone, watching his sons argue over who gets the last chocolate chip pancake. Not the dinosaur-shaped ones of desperation, but perfectly round ones made with laughter, and the kind of chaos that only comes when family feels safe enough to be completely themselves. I made them, so I should get the last one, Malik argues, brandishing a spatula like evidence in court. But I'm still growing, Avery counters, stretching to his full height, which now rivals his older brother's. I need the nutrients for development. You're 16, Malik laughs. You're not developing anything except an attitude. Corbin watches this ridiculous debate with the same wonder he once reserved for closing billion-dollar deals. These moments, ordinary, loud, beautifully imperfect, are what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not the quiet house of grief and careful politeness, but the vibrant chaos of people who belong to each other completely. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments when cultural differences created friction instead of harmony. Malik struggled with feeling guilty about his privileges while his foster siblings still lived in group homes. Avery battled anxiety about whether he deserved the happiness he'd found. Corbin learned to navigate conversations about race and class and systemic inequality that his expensive education had never prepared him for. But they learned together. They grew together. They became family not despite their differences, but because of their commitment to honoring those differences while building something entirely new. Have you ever judged someone's motives before understanding their heart? Have you ever looked at an unlikely family and wonder if love could really transcend such obvious barriers? Have you ever questioned whether healing is possible when wounds run so deep they seem permanent? The Thorne family story answers all those questions with a resounding yes, but only because all 3 of them were brave enough to risk being wrong about each other. Today, Malik is 17, a senior at Westfield Academy who's been accepted to Columbia University with a full scholarship for social work as college essay, titled The Art of Staying Soft, has been read at adoption conferences across the country. He still visits the community center every Saturday, still tells stories of children who need reminding that their voices matter. Avery, now 16, runs a youth advocacy division of Stories for Change, which has grown into a nationally recognized organization influencing policy in 12 states. His book, Unfolding, A Guide to Finding Your Voice After Loss, became a bestseller not because of his father's connections, but because broken children everywhere recognize their own journey in his words. The boy who once couldn't speak without stuttering now addresses audiences of thousands with a kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. And Corbin? He's learned that success isn't measured in stock prices or corporate acquisitions, but in the sound of laughter echoing through rooms that once held only silence. He's discovered that the best investment he ever made wasn't in real estate or technology, but in being present for pancake debates and homework struggles and the million small moments that build families one day at a time. Do you know someone who needs belonging more than they need fixing? Do you see children in your community who are waiting for someone to choose them? Not as charity cases or good deeds, but as the missing pieces of families that don't yet know they're incomplete? The statistics haven't changed dramatically since Malik entered the foster care system. Black children still wait longer for adoption. Older children still face steeper odds. The system still fails too many kids who age out without ever finding their forever families. But every family that chooses love over fear, every adoption that prioritizes a child's needs over the adult's comfort, every person who looks beyond surface differences to see the human being underneath, each of these choices creates ripples that change everything. What if your next brave decision changes 3 lives instead of 1? The greenhouse behind the thorn house still blooms magnificently. Elena's orchids share space with Malik's heritage tomatoes and Avery's experimental herbs. Different plants, different origins, but all thriving in soil made rich by careful tending and unconditional love. Sometimes a family you need finds you when you're brave enough to need them. The adoption that critics called a publicity stunt became the most authentic thing any of them had ever experienced. The child they thought needed saving became the teacher they didn't know they needed. The broken family became the healing force their entire community had been waiting for. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. Because every family miracle starts with someone believing that love is stronger than fear, that belonging is more powerful than biology, and that the most beautiful families are often the ones that look nothing like what the world expects. Subscribe for more stories that prove love wins. Share this with someone who needs to remember that families are built, not born. And comment below with your own story of unexpected belonging. Because we all have them, those moments when strangers became family, and home became wherever people chose to see us clearly and love us completely. Corbin Thorne thought he was adopting a child. Instead, he adopted a miracle. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to open our hearts to the impossible, that's exactly what happens when love leads the way. The boy who had everything but felt empty, the boy who had nothing but overflowed with joy, and the man who had success but lacked purpose found each other at the exact moment when each of them was ready to be found. That's not coincidence. That's grace. That's family. That's what happens when 3 broken people decide that healing happens best when it happens together. Thank you, and let me know what you think in the comment section below.